Okay, awesome. So hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest Kumi Now online gathering. If you're new here, we have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter called Kumi Now, so you can check out our advertisements for these events. And we also have a YouTube channel that we publish most of our videos a few days after we record them every Tuesday. So I'll put a link to that in the chat if you want to check out any previous videos. And today we have the privilege of being joined by Sam Bahour. So I'll introduce Sam and then he'll begin his session today to talk about the economy and colonialism and natural resources. He'll expand a little bit more on his presentation. And then we'll have, after he has a presentation, we'll have some time for a Q&A. So make sure that your mics are muted during the presentation, but after you can put your questions in the chat and we'll make sure that Sam receives those questions. So to introduce Sam, Sam is a longtime friend of Sabeel. He is a Palestinian American, originally from Ohio, if I'm not mistaken. And he's currently residing in Ramallah, Palestine. He does business consulting as applied information management, specializing in business development with a niche focus on information technology sector and startups. Sam was instrumental in the establishment of two publicly traded firms, the Palestine Telecommunications Company and the Arab-Palestinian Shopping Centers. He's co-founder and emeritus member of Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. He currently is an independent director at the Arab Islamic Bank, PLC, and a board member at Just Vision. He writes frequently on Palestinian affairs and has been widely published in leading outlets. He's also the co-editor of Homeland, Oral History of Palestine and Palestinians, and he has a pretty active Twitter account that I think we can link that later on in the chat. And he also blogs. I think his website is on his name, actually, epalestine.ps. So Sam, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Great to see so many familiar faces as well, and great to see new people that I haven't met yet. I will give a presentation about the economy, and then looking forward to your questions. The presentation is slightly long, so I'm going to give a brief version as much as possible, and feel free to point me back to any slide that you would like more explanation on. Also, well, let me start, and I'll tell that when I start. If I can have the share, okay. Let's see if this works. Can everybody see my screen? Somebody just gives me a thumbs up here. Okay. And let me close this. Very good. So my presentation is entitled Economic Justice in Palestine. Actually, this presentation was made around 2-3 years ago, and I've continued to update it. This has always been my starting slide, even before this onslaught on Gaza in October 2023. It's a picture of the Sea of Gaza sent to me by a dear friend, Maham Henna, who used to work for me and now consults when I need her, but she's doing her PhD in Canada. And she sent me a message a couple months back. Okay, let me just make sure I can get this moving here. Here we go. She's watching Gaza be destroyed from afar, including family members and her home. And we have a campaign for her, and we'll talk about that later. But this is Gaza today. This is actually not today. This is about 8 months ago, so it's much worse than this. Let me start, and this audience knows this, but I always want to point to where we are in terms of that orange place next to Jordan, and that sliver of land called the Gaza Strip. This is a tiny, tiny location. It is so tiny that it is unfathomable that the international community for 75 years have not been able to bring this to a resolution up until now. Just the opposite. It has continued to become a war zone, a genocide zone, worsening by the year. And I put this in context because there's a reason why the international community has failed in the occupied territory. It is because there's no political will to take action forward in a constructive way. And we can talk about that more later. But definitely, if the international community wanted to do something, the area is so tiny that they could have a long time ago. I always start my presentations before 1948 because there was life in Palestine before Israel was created. And this is 1946, the districts, how Palestine was divided into districts at the time. Always good to remember that there was life here before Israel. And then, again, this is a 30,000-foot view. We have the General Assembly Resolution 181, which in 1947 decided to divide Palestine, to partition Palestine. Actually, it is the only document on the books in the international documentation that defines what two states, a partitioned Palestine, would look like. And the Arab state would be the gray part, and the yellowish part would be Israel, or the Jewish state. Interestingly, in that resolution, they did not define Jewish or Arab. And that's rather important because Arab could mean Saudi Arabian and Jewish could mean New York City. So that was a flaw in this entire presentation of Resolution 181. Another important thing to keep in mind here, it was a General Assembly resolution. Thus, it was not binding on the parties. Fast forward, Israel publicly said they accepted the partition plan. On the ground, they didn't, and took military action in 1948 to create what we know today as the State of Israel, being all the yellow part, leaving the gray parts to be occupied in 1967, and what we know today as occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem. Fast forward to 30 years after the Oslo Accords, and by the way, they are called the Oslo Accords, not the Oslo Peace Accords, and now we know why. The word peace was not part of the title. And the State of Israel and the emerging Palestinian Bantustan. This map actually comes from a UN organization here in Jerusalem, which maps the most detailed reflection of what's on the ground. And if you go to their website, the name of the organization is OSHA. If you go to the website, they'll have the blank West Bank. And every time you hit a button, they'll put a layer of the restrictions in our life on top of each other. So there's a layer of settlements, a layer of military zones, a layer of checkpoints, a layer of military earth mounds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You end up with a map very similar to this one, which is not a map at all. It's basically a piece of Swiss cheese, and the Palestinians are living in the holes of that Swiss cheese. This is the result of 30 years of a US monopolized process that was supposed to end the occupation. At least that's what everybody in the world thought. And so just to summarize the history part, and I say impunity comes with a cost. We start with Palestine from the river to the sea, and we end up with Swiss cheese that we cannot move from one city to the other without having to face Israeli checkpoints, and today more than ever before. And I always quote Chris Hedges, this amazing US American journalist. If you don't follow him, you should. And he once wrote, "You can't talk about hope until you see reality, and reality is pretty bleak, but that's the starting point." So we have to start with what we have and work from there. And what we have now, if I added Gaza to this map, is a total catastrophe. The Israeli side has a different version of a map. This was taken in September 2023 at the UN General Assembly, where Netanyahu proudly pulls out a map which shows Israel in the blue there. There's no West Bank, there's no Gaza, there's no Palestinians. The Israeli version of his map is Israel from the river to the sea. So it makes us question why that from the river to the sea is so problematic today in the US, given that's exactly what Netanyahu has been promoting on the international stage. So to go through some of the historic stages that we've been through. First, as I said, pre-1948, pre-Israel, there was an organic development. It was an agricultural community for the most part. We were part of a region called the Middle East. There's two books I point to here, and I'll give you these later if you don't want to copy them here. But one is Hidden Histories, fascinating book packed with tidbits of what life was like before 1948. It was done by Professor Raed from the Al-Quds University. And the other is by a Jewish Canadian friend of mine, Professor Rabkin. Very, very detailed book of what was here before the state of Israel was created. And then, of course, we had a downfall. 1948, the military aggression, which created the state of Israel, we were in shock. An element of that period of time was fragmentation. That's when our people started to be fragmented, with over 750,000 Palestinians fleeing Israel due to being persecuted. I want to use the Israeli mindset. They didn't leave, they weren't forced to leave. They all decided on that day in 1948 that they were going to go on a picnic to Lebanon and Jordan. That's not the issue of how they left. The issue is, since that time until today, Israel has blocked the doors for them to come back home. And that's what's enshrined in international law. Not the means that they left with, but the terms of coming back home, which is their right. Two books I point to for this period of time: Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, historic book by Ilan Pappé, very, very important read. And a dear friend of mine, a Christian Palestinian who now lives in the north part of Israel on the Lebanese border, she wrote Stranger in My Own Land, fascinating book about her memoir, her family's memoir, very well documented to incorporate history as well. That's an important memoir because her family encompasses almost the entire story of the Palestinian struggle, from people who were born in Israel, some who fled after 1948, some who joined the PLO, some who were fighters, some were politicians, and then some that actually came back to Israel after the Oslo Accords. Fascinating read, I encourage it. And then we had the period of time of the military occupation in 1967. I can say that goes on, it goes on until today. But the period of time I want to talk about is 1967 to 1993. The elements of that phase was an attempt by Israel to normalize the occupation. They were saying, this is a benign occupation. What are you Palestinians complaining about? Arabs in the region aren't as well off as you are under occupation. The reality is it meant more fragmentation, more refugees when the land was occupied in 67, and more forced dependency. We were taxed by the military occupation for years on end with zero representation on how those taxes would be used. Rings a bell to an American audience. No taxation without representation. So it should ring a bell for us too. The two books I point to for this period of time is Kingdom of Olives and Ash, a fascinating book. There's a US American Pulitzer Prize winning writer. His name is Michael Charbonne, if you've heard of him. He and his Israeli American wife, Ayelet Wildman, on the 50th anniversary of the occupation, wanted to do something to commemorate that this has been going on for 50 years. And they said to themselves, we don't know how to do anything but write. So they assembled about 24 award-winning writers, very well-known names from around the world, and brought them to Palestine for 2 weeks. For 1 week, they toured, like many of you have done in the past with Sabine. And for the second week, each one picked a topic to write a chapter about. And I was in the room when they distributed the task. And when it got to Michael Charbonne, the editor's turn, they asked him, Michael, what are you going to write about? And he turned around and pointed to me and said, I'm going to write about him. And I said, that's going to be a pretty boring topic because I spend most of my days in boardrooms. He goes, I don't care. I just want to spend a day with you. I won't break to you what happened to me that day. It wasn't a normal day. And if you don't want to read the whole book, the chapter about me was also published separately under the title The Tallest Man in Ramallah. The second book I point to is from a dear friend, John Quigley, Professor John Quigley from Columbus, The Case for Palestine. And he gives the legal debate about this case, which is a very, very important reference book, in my opinion. And then we had the period of time when I relocated here, 1994 until today. And I would characterize that period of time with apartheid, annexation, and annihilation. And annihilation was there before the October 7th events. This is an ongoing process that anybody looking at this closely could have expected, not knowing exactly how it was going to happen, but we saw where Israel was heading. Two books I'll point to: Palestinian Refugees in International Law. One of the co-authors of this book is Francesca Albanese, which currently is the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights. She has been very, very outspoken about this phase that we're in currently. This is a handbook on refugees. Anything you want to know about refugees, this would be the book to point to. And the other book is Moment of Truth. Throughout these 30 years of the Oslo process, Jamie Weiner actually got together a collection of stories about what was happening on the ground while these negotiators were going from capital to capital trying to negotiate this. And what you'll see in that book, and I have a chapter there as well, is that on the ground, it was apartheid, annexation, annihilation, regardless of what was being talked about abroad. So I want to jump into the economic part of this, and I start with, again, pre-1948. On the left, on my left of the screen, is the train schedule for Palestine in 1946. That's a lot of locations for a no people being around going to. As you know, the Israelis say there was no one here before Israel was created. That's a lot of places those no people are going to. On the right is a picture from Bethlehem. Those look like people to me. Economically, during that period of time, cotton was a major harvest. This is in 1937 in Kufr Saba. Cotton is no longer an industry here. Also, we had Jaffa. It was the bride of Palestine on the shore, very well known for their oranges, of course, as well as for other vegetables that were coming in and out of the port at Jaffa. And I put here a column, a quote from a friend of mine, Zahi Khoury, who had an article in the Israeli English newspaper, Haaretz, a couple years ago, or in 2023. And he talks about in 1923, his grandfather had a company, and on the board of that company were 6 Palestinian Christians and Muslims and 6 Palestinian Jews working together to export the oranges and so forth. Life was not only encompassing of all religions before Israel was created, it was thriving within the context of the time. And then we have Palestine from 1948 to 1966. Hard to look at this picture from back then because it's the same kind of pictures that we're seeing today. Palestinian refugeedom started. People fled or left their homes under distress. UNRWA was created for note, by encouragement of Israel. UNRWA was created. Israel at that time did not want to take the responsibility for the refugees, so they almost begged the international community to create this agency that would take that burden off of their back. How ironic today that they're attacking the organization to be able to destroy the refugee community. And this picture here means a lot to me because it's hard for me to fathom. You're a refugee, newly created refugee. You're kicked out of your land. You're sitting now in probably Jordan, and you go to school on rubble. Education for Palestinians is on the top of the agenda. And that says a lot about our people and how much we hold on to education when all else is being taken from us. In 1966, the Palestinians found a Quisly to be able to sign off on ending military rule. From 1948 to 1966, the Palestinians who stayed in Israel, they did not flee, they were put under military rule. In 1966, that military rule formally ended and was transferred in 1967 to the occupation. I'll get to that in a second, but back to that school picture. Think about what we're seeing today. This made me cry. This is a young boy in Gaza about 8, 9 months ago, trying to study in the rubble of his home. Again, education is paramount for Palestinians. So 1967, the occupation started. What that meant economically is that Palestinians started to work mostly inside Israel, mainly in construction. You'll see the top corner and the bottom corner there, the dirty job of construction, the plumbing and so forth. These are buses on the left here that drop off workers who go stand at the border with Israel to be able to be picked up by Israeli employers. Sounds like the South in the US during the 60s. And agriculture is a big sector that Palestinian hands are involved with, and a little bit of light manufacturing like you see in the middle. On the top there, you see sweatshops. A lot of the garment factories that Israel claimed was a highlight of their industries at the time, garments, were actually sewed in Palestinian cities. I think that picture comes from Nablus in the West Bank. So the Palestinian woman mainly would sew these garments, send them back to Israel. They would be marked made in Israel and marketed to Kaufman's and J.C. Penney's and the other places you buy your garments. And then we have today, 1993, when Oslo started until today. And just to give a very quick overview, without going into details of these, but just to give you a snapshot. And for those of you who have been here, you've seen some of these. Top left corner, Unipal. Unipal is a major distribution company in Palestine. They actually work outside of Palestine as well these days. They distribute Philip Morris, Procter & Gamble, Kraft. They're one of the main representatives of US brands here, as well as many others. Below that is Paltel. That's the telecommunications company. That's why I relocated in 1994 to come help build that company. It's the largest private sector company in Palestine today. The bottom left there is from Nablus, the old city of Nablus. You may have ate this person's kanafe being a major national dish, a sweet dish. And then you have fishing that goes on in Gaza, or used to go on in Gaza. And then moving on the bottom there, you have a plastics factory in Hebron, very modern places. I visited this place specifically. And on the right corner there, you have Bisan Systems, which is an IT company, an accounting software company of two graduates from San Francisco University, husband, wife. They came back and have built the leading software company in Palestine. Right above that, Canon Free Trade. We're very proud of this company because if you go to Whole Foods anywhere in the US, you will find these products, olive oil and olives from Canon Free Trade on the shelves of Whole Trade. On the left there after that is Jerusalem Pharmaceuticals. Palestine has, I think, 5 pharmaceutical manufacturing companies. It's a major sector here. And then on top right there, you have Jasser Palace, which is a famous historic palace that was converted into a hotel, hoping that the Pope was going to come and visit it in year 2000. Pope never came because the Intifada started, and the hotel has been severely economically damaged from the turmoil ever since that time. And smack in the middle there, you have a very important publication called This Week in Palestine. It actually comes out every month, as if we need more complication in our life. But it was supposed to come out every week when the Pope came, and because all of the mess that happened after that, they started publishing it every month, but they kept the name. This can be downloaded for free. I highly encourage you to subscribe to this publication. Every edition has a theme, and it's half editorial and half directory. So it has maps and other things, but every edition covers a topic. This specific one is about entrepreneurship in Palestine. So just to summarize, the economic sectors in Palestine, tourism is number one. It will always be number one. It's not because we are gurus in tourism. It's because a few prophets decided to die here, and so now we're building economic sectors around them. And that requires stability for tourists to get here. We've never had the stability required to fully realize the tourism potential. Services. Ever since the Oslo Accords started and donor money came flowing in and the private sector started to become modernized, services has become a major sector in the West Bank. Agriculture, always an important element of our economy. When I arrived in 1994, it was 12% of our GDP. Today, it's down to about 2%. Why? And I can say this on International Water Day here, is because Israel controls the elements of agriculture. What are the elements of agriculture? Land, water, movement of product. All three things Israel has full control over. And they purposely brought our agriculture sector into the ground, hoping to disrupt our food safety. Financial sector has become a booming sector. I actually sit on one of the board's banks, but banking, insurance, and microfinance are thriving here, and they're linked to the international world. I mean, these are not standalone banks. They're banks that are part of the international banking system. Same with insurance. ICT, information and communications technology, close to my heart because that's my background. Also a booming industry. Where was it booming most? In Gaza. Why? Out of need. Because Gaza has been under closure for 16 years, the young people in Gaza took to the digital economy to be able to connect to the outside world. So it's no haphazardness that actually destroyed the 5 universities in Gaza purposely by controlled demolitions. They're destroying the ability for us to be able to have a sector that can serve the population. Of course, light industry, like I showed, plastics and others. And we're building a state. So construction, building materials, and energy before Gaza was a major sector. With Gaza, it's going to be a major sector forever, given it will take decades to bring Gaza back to life. So a couple of statistics here, just to put things in perspective again. The West Bank and Gaza, it's about the size between Delaware and Rhode Island. Peanuts in the international scheme of things. Palestinian people are 15 million strong. We actually count them every morning, and we're losing a lot of them, to be honest. Palestine here has about 5.4 million. Sadly, I need to change that because about 100,000 people need to be removed from that because of what's going on in Gaza. Unfathomable. Inside Israel, you have about 2 million Palestinian Christians and Muslims who did not leave when Israel was created, and these are their descendants as well. We have about 5 million refugees and about 2.6 million diaspora Palestinians, like my father in Ohio. The GDP in 2024 for Palestine was 17.7 billion. Israel's GDP is 520 billion, amazing number. We are 3.4% of the Israeli economy. Likewise, our GDP per capita is about $2,800. In Israel, it's $52,000. So we get paid about 5% of what Israelis get paid. Those numbers, of course, have dropped with all the turmoil that's happening right now. But my point here is, if your neighbor is making 3% of what you're making or 5% of what you're making, do you think you're going to have neighborly relations forever? Definitely not. Something is going to break, and it did. So Gaza Strip, the same land area as Las Vegas, but has 3 times more the population. The economic stranglehold. Palestine imports about 70% of its economy. More than half of that comes from Israel. Why? Because Israel makes it very difficult and very costly for us to import from abroad. But they make it very streamlined for us to be able to import from Israeli manufacturers. This is one of the reasons why the BDS effort in Palestine has not been as successful as it has been outside of Palestine because our economy is a function of Israeli control. We also export about 20% of our economy. 88% of that goes to Israel. They make it difficult for us to have a direct relationship with the outside world, but they make it very easy for us to sell those garments to an Israeli garment company that will then take it to the market abroad. Keep in mind, and you may have noticed when you're traveling around Palestine, you're looking at these numbers and you're saying, but Sam, all these buildings are going up and all these nice cars and people are dressed nice. How can that happen? And it happens because the informal economy here is as large or larger than the formal economy. What is the informal economy? It's the porous borders between Israel and the occupied territory, where business is done in the black market, basically, and never gets registered in the numbers. So reality on the ground from a legal perspective, when I took my MBA degree, they told me when you go to a new market, the first thing you have to look at is the laws. So when I started looking at what I thought was the law, I found the laws with an S. I found Ottoman law. Some land issues here, and the Ottomans were here for 400 years, so they had a lot of time to instill their laws. Some of the land issues here still use references to the Ottoman period. For example, if I want to get a deed for a piece of land, it's called tabo. Tabo is not a Palestinian and not an Arab word. It's an actual Turkish word, and that's from the Ottoman time. And then the British were here for about 30 years, and being very legalistic as they are, they left many laws here that remained in place. Interesting fact here, one of the laws the British passed was the emergency regulations. And they passed those to be able to crack down on the Zionist militias that were attacking them at the time. And the Jewish community had a fit. How dare you, British, pass a law against us to imprison us without charge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then when Israel was created, they kept those regulations in place and just turned them over to be able to be applied to the Palestinians. That's how they can justify today that they're arresting Palestinians administratively without charge. And then the Jordanians took over after the British the West Bank. The Egyptians after the British took over Egypt, took over Gaza, and they left remnants of their laws as well. And then the Oslo process happened. The Palestinian Authority was established, and they started legislating some of their own laws to get rid of the past ones. But overall, the Israeli military orders, ever since 1967, override all of the above. If there is a military order, it ignores all other laws, and it just says that the military decides what happens. I'll give you an example. There's thousands of military orders, but like one of them, one of the first ones in 1967, was that 10 or more Palestinians cannot assemble. And if you notice today, when there's a demonstration, there's not 10, there's hundreds and thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of demonstrators. So the Israel can pull up that military order and say, we issued an order that more than 10, it's an illegal demonstrations, and we can attack it, crack down on it, and arrest people. I add to this a couple other references because I understand that military occupation does not mean it becomes the wild, wild west. The Fourth Geneva Convention should apply because this is military occupation as defined by international law. The Hague Regulations apply. UN resolutions apply. The last I counted, and there's many more since then, was September 2022. 754 General Assembly resolutions, 97 Security Council resolutions, 96 resolutions from the Human Rights Council. Not one was implemented. No wonder we are where we are today. So the state of affairs, East Jerusalem, it was illegally annexed in 1980 by a measure of the Israeli Knesset, their parliament. The international community responded at the Security Council, a binding resolution which called that an illegal annexation, and even the US abstained to allow that to pass. And then fast forward to the first Trump era, and the US is moving their embassy to Jerusalem, even though it's stated in that resolution of the UN that no one should deal with Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. The West Bank and Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem, 57 years under military occupation. The new Palestine, and I'll explain what I mean by new, is a state in the making. In November 29, 2012, Palestinians went to the UN and declared that they would like to create their state on 22% of British mandated Palestine, what we know as the occupied territory. I wish they would have called it New Palestine, just like New Zealand. Why? Because Palestine in our hearts and our minds will always be Palestine from the river to the sea. No one is going to be able to change that. However, politically, our minds totally understand that the new Palestine, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, is our new state in the making, a huge concession that the Palestinians have made, and the US and Israel have refused, which means the Palestinians may revoke that in the near future. I'll get back to that later. Gaza before the war was under 16 years of siege. Just to put that in perspective, 16 years of siege. If you were on October 6th, not October 7th, on October 6th, if you were 16 years old, you didn't know what it meant to have electricity day and night because you were only given it a couple hours a day. You didn't know what it meant to drink clean water because your entire life you had salty water that was unhealthy to drink. So you can imagine the kind of generation that was groomed with this Gaza siege. And now we have a plausible genocide, as it's called by the International Criminal Court. Israel does not recognize any of the above statuses. They only recognize that map that I showed in the beginning that Netanyahu was holding up. Israel from the river to the sea. No wonder they're pissed off when we use those words. That's exactly what they're doing. From an economic perspective, again, our currency, if I open up my wallet, you'll find new Israeli shekel. That's our main currency that we use for our day-to-day. Buying a falafel sandwich, we use shekel. If we're buying a high-ticketed item like a car or a piece of land, we'll use the US dollar or the Jordanian dinar. And because there's a lot of travel between here and Europe, you'll find some people that actually have euros in their pocket as well. There's about, before the war, about 153 to 200,000 Palestinians go into Israel and into the illegal settlements to work every single day. About 150,000 of them go to the Israeli military and have to get a permit, a piece of paper issued by the Israeli military, which allows them to cross a checkpoint into Israel. The other 50,000 can't get a permit. Why? For example, if you have ever been arrested by the Israelis, and since 1967, 1 million Palestinians have gone through the Israeli prison system, they can't get permits. So what do? They go to a hardware store and buy a 100 shekel ladder, which is like a $25 ladder, and they put it up on the 4 million shekel wall, and they just walk over into Israel to go to work. Today, it's back to, they stopped all workers when October 7th happened, and now they're back to around 20 to 30,000 only. A major dent in the ability for Palestinians to find their livelihood. Bottom line, this is a profitable occupation. I actually can say that up to October 7th. Since then, Israel has been paying out of its ears using US money to be able to follow up on their genocide. But up until that point, Israel was benefiting $5 billion a year from this occupation. No wonder it won't end. There's a lot of people making money off of our misery. So very quickly to end here, case in point is the telecom sector. When I relocated to Palestine, I came to actually help build the telecommunications company. And I read Oslo. And Oslo, the agreement said, Palestinian side has the right to build and operate separate and independent communication systems. separate and independent. I told my wife at the time, this agreement is not ending the occupation, but why would they use the words separate and independent if we weren't heading to statehood? Picked up and I relocated to Palestine. 30 years later, our network, I'm no longer with the company, but our network is not separate or independent by Israeli design. Why? Israel controls the frequencies, the airspace. Israel controls the connectivity between the cities. If I want to connect Bethlehem to Ramallah, I have to get Israeli permission to do so in full Israeli control. Flow of human resources. Telecom is about technicians putting up these towers and going from place to place and bringing in consultants from abroad. All of that is controlled by Israel. I can go into any of these in more detail later. And then import. We're not a telecom equipment importer. Most countries are not. So where do we bring in our imports? Whether it's telecom or other materials, including food, we bring it through Israeli ports. This happens to be one of the largest Israeli ports. It's the Ashdod port. And Israel basically said, there is no change in what matters. Before Oslo, you did not have a connection to the outside world. During Oslo, you're not going to have a connection directly to the outside world. And of course, after Oslo, you're still not going to have a direct connection to the outside world. Everything you do will have to come through our Israeli ports. And what does that mean? It means, number one, customs. Instead of an importer, if I want to order 1,000 chairs, I would need to pay custom fees to my government. Israel says you will not pay custom fees to the Palestinian government. You will pay it to the port authority. And the port authority will collect that money, and at the end of the month, subtract 3%, which is a tremendous amount of money, for handling charges, and transfer the 97% to the government. Why is this important? The 97% of our custom fees is about 70% of the Palestinian government's operating budget. Over time, when Israel wanted to punish the Palestinians, they would just turn off the faucet and not transfer us our custom fees. When we went to the UN, Netanyahu did that. He turned off the faucet. And then after he saw things were getting agitated here, he turned it back on. And then for something else, he turned it off. So they're playing with the lives. That in international law is called collective punishment. The second thing regarding importing of goods, standards. We're a Western audience. The word standards has a positive connotation to it. But here it means something very different. Here it means that if you want to build an economy, Israel says, our Israeli economy is way up here. It's high tech, it's modern, it's Western looking. Your Palestinian economy is just starting out. It's below the table. But we don't care. Everything you import are going to have to meet Israeli first world standards. That's a very polite way to say, Palestinians, you will pay out of your ears to develop your economy. And then lastly, the one we like best because there's no way to explain it is security. Everything has to pass Israeli security. There's an example of products, exact same products coming from Palestine, and they were coming to Israel. The Israeli product cleared customs in about 3 weeks. The same exact product, earmarked for the Palestinian Authority areas, sat at the port for 2 years. That's actually a telecom example that I lived through, so I can speak firsthand about. So, in ending, Gaza is what I remember it to be. This is the color for Gaza. Poor, yes. In distress, yes. But one of the most beautiful people that you can ever find anywhere. This is Gaza. I can't even get my mind around the pictures that we are seeing. If this is not genocide, I don't know the definition of genocide. But we will keep doing these talks because these are the kids of Gaza that make me want to keep giving talks every day. I don't know where these kids are today. Are they dead? Did they die this morning at the 2 a.m. bombings of the shelters? Or are they in these lines trying to get food? It's not only Gaza. This is Jenin. This is actually one of our food baskets, Jericho being the second. This is Jenin in 2002, when Israeli tanks came into the refugee camp and opened up what the tank driver proudly said is that we're opening up football fields in the middle of the camp. This is Jenin in 2023. It's worse in 2024. The new tactic that the Israelis are using is not only coming in the camps to arrest people, but now they're bringing bulldozers and uprooting the infrastructure of the camps. When you see a road like this uprooted, know very well that that also means water was damaged, sewage was damaged, utilities were damaged. They have a very clear purpose in mind, which is to destroy the living conditions of the camp. Right now, we have 40,000 plus refugees in the north of the West Bank that have fled their refugee camps because of the Israeli military's presence, emptying the camps. And what I hear from my friends there is that the Israeli military are opening very broad roads through the camps so the tanks can easily go around, exactly what they did in Gaza in 1970 and 1980. These are kids of Jenin. Again, it's a reason why we keep doing this, and we'll keep doing it. And with that, I will stop and just want to make one other comment, and I'll do that with another share if you allow me. There's actually three things I'd like to show you here. Today's International Water Day, or this week is, and this is for the West Bank. Just to give you an idea, the West Bank communities are not hooked up to the water grid. They get 26 liters of water. Those that are hooked up get around 82. The World Health Organization says the minimum should be 100. Israeli settlers using our water supply are getting 247 per person. Says a lot. Another slide I'd like to show you is Gaza specifically. There's a lot that can be said about Gaza water supply. Oh, wrong one, sorry. And I'll show you a report that actually talks about this right now. But this is the Gaza reality in terms of, and it's worse today, this is November 2023. Fresh water has 100 milligrams of salt. That's what you and I drink. The WHO says you're allowed to drink water with 200 milligrams of salt in it. The wells that the Gazans are being forced to drink from have 3,000 milligrams of water. It's almost the equivalent of drinking seawater, which has 3,500. For those of you that are interested more in the water reality here, I'd highly encourage you to go to this report from an organization that I'm on the advisory board for the MENA region. It's Human Rights Watch. We just released a report about the acts of genocide in Gaza using water as the example. So I would highly recommend reading this report if you're interested in water. And with that, I will stop talking.
Thank you so much, Sam, for this really rich and very detailed presentation as well. I wanted to ask you, for like people who are invested in Palestinian freedom and part of these movements and our movements, why do you think the economy and what you kind of presented is important for us? Like how do we incorporate this in our daily activism and our work?
It's for me, and I'm biased because I work in this sector, but it's extremely important. Partly because, as I noted, this is a profitable occupation for the Israelis. So the more that they can suppress Palestinian economy, the more they benefit economically. So that's one of the motivators for the occupation to remain intact. In addition to that, it's important to note that I was talking about telecom and how they control the airwaves. The airwaves are a natural resource. That is one natural resource that they are stripping from us. But they also strip from us our water, as I mentioned at the end. They also strip from us our mining abilities. Stone and marble is the biggest sector in Palestine. Israel Supreme Court, about 6 years ago, ruled that Israeli companies are allowed to come into the occupied territory and literally take the stone and marble out of the mountains and take it back to Israel and sell it as tiles that you put in your bedroom and bathroom and so forth. So they are stripping us from our natural resources. And the biggest one is our natural gas reserves off the Sea of Gaza. We would not need, before the war, we would not need donor support at all. I would not be asking you, Sabine would not be asking you for donations if we were allowed to tap our natural reserves of gas. Israel, ever since these gas reserves were found in 1999, have blocked the ability for Palestinians to tap that gas. It's about a $7-8 billion reserve. Unbelievable. Instead, they forced us to become a donor community, a donor beneficiary. And now you add Gaza genocide to the mix, and we're talking about a $55 billion recovery plan, above the means of the global community even. So we're in a bind. But also, last thing I'll say here, using the economic prism allows us to have targets anywhere you live. If you live in a rural America and they only have one supermarket, you can go and make sure that supermarket does not sell Israeli products that use Palestinian resources or use their funds to support this occupation. If you're a financial advisor or if you're sitting on your church's pension scheme, you can make sure that you are not investing in companies that invest in Israel, because that's an investment in occupation. There's an article out today of a new fund that was created by the Israeli, the JDL, I believe is the name. It's an Israeli fund in the US getting millions, if not billions of dollars into a fund to support US companies that fund Israel. They see the BDS movement as being very effective and they're trying to counter it. So we can use the economic debate. And we have the ability for each and every one of us to participate. Christmas just passed. Easter's around the corner. Buy your Palestinian gifts. Support Palestinian businesses. If you don't want to order it online, go to Whole Foods and buy Canon free trade equipment products. If you want to buy your spirits, there's a company in California called Fierce and Kind, which sells spirits. It's a Palestinian-owned company, and they support Palestinian causes. You will find so many different ways to support Palestine, and I think that's one way that we can personally be involved in supporting the Palestinian economy. Sorry for the long answer.
No, this was
I can speak for 2
helpful.
days on that question.
And actually, I think it might be helpful if you have recommendations for, I know other than the BDS list, the official National BDS Committee, are there other organizations that people should look at or doing research in specific sectors about organizations that are funding genocide and things like this? Like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the BDS one is a rather good one because that's where the campaigning is happening. There are many, many companies, and we can't grasp all of them at once. So the BDS movement has picked some targets to create campaigns around. So those are the ones that would make sense to lobby around because you're adding your voice to other voices to make the impact. But also there's a outfit in Israel, highly respected, called Who Profits. If you go to whoprofits.org, and they have a listing of the companies that are benefiting from the occupation. Also, the UN, officially, the UN has a blacklist of companies who are operating in the settlements. It's a UN list. Countries of the world have been told through resolutions not to allow these companies to do business. And I would, Sabia, please get that list and send it around. That's like the in-your-face list that the entire international community has produced. And these are companies that are directly working in the settlement enterprise. So there's no lack of targets to focus on, but I would say don't only focus on the negative. It's hard, I know, to rally people around not doing something. I also want you to rally people around doing something, buying your gifts from Palestinian suppliers, et cetera, because the positive part of doing something also gives us hope that we're supporting people on the ground who are facing this day in and day out.
Randy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Sam has already said about the natural gas fields off of Gaza. Chevron is the largest investor in natural gas products in that area, and they pay about $500 million in tax money to Israel every year to be able to lease and export natural gas primarily to Europe. So if you want to participate in a boycott of Chevron products here in the United States, I put the link in the chat. The AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, is leading that along with the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights.
Thank you.
Thanks for mentioning AFSC. They're an important factor in this as well because they're doing some serious work around the companies and the corporate corporate responsibility for this as well. If I may, one person put in the chat a very important point that we should not only boycott settlement products or goods, but Israel as a whole. Personally, I totally agree with that. But I also want to state, we don't have a litmus test for people who want to be in solidarity with us. I'm going the 100 yards. I'm in this until this occupation ends. Some people may be in it for the 10 yards or the 20 yards or the 30 yards. So I don't put people in litmus tests. I can hold the hand of anybody who wants to take any measure against this military occupation. It could be only settlement products. It could be Israel. It could be the US, which should be the first on the list of being the enabler to allow all of this to happen, especially these days. But again, I'm very clear that I don't have a litmus test for people in solidarity, as long as they are in solidarity and not out to destroy us as a people.
Mary Ann, you can ask your question.
Okay. Can you repeat, Sam, what the profit is from the Gaza gas, marine gas?
I think it's a 7 to 8 billion. It's a billion-dollar value. Huge amount of money.
Okay, because I remember when this October 7th first happened. I learned that because a lot of some of us on this call actually have been focusing on nuclear weapons, and the Columbia class. It's not a Trident submarine, but it's a Columbia class submarine had been parked off of the coast of Gaza, along with the two ships that were there, and that Chevron was told cut the production of the gas at the moment. I'm imagining that they have started up production again, not to lose out on any profit.
Mary Ann, there's also a adjacent reserve in the Israeli waters.
Yes.
Yeah, they're probably talking about that. There's actually talk about that project may be cross-drilling illegally to tap the Palestinian well. I'm not sure, but that's something that has been spoken about. But there's a well inside Israeli waters, different than the Palestinian well in the Gazan waters.
Yes. Yeah. Sam, this is excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. So we have a question here. I think this could be helpful based on your expertise, Sam. Some products that are said in the US are labeled made in Israel. Some are made in the West Bank. And so someone just wanted to ask for a clarification of whether those labeled and made in the West Bank, are they safe enough to buy, or could they be settlement products?
I don't have a generic answer. I would need to know what the brand is, and I can tell you if it's something which was produced in a Palestinian factory or not. The labeling is a major issue. So there's no generic answer. You need to dig deep. But if you go to Who Profits, or the BDS website or AFSC's website, out of those three, you should be able to define that product. What is it? What's the background of it?
Okay, wonderful. And then I think another question here is it the case that Palestine has been invited to be part of BRICS? Is that likely to happen? Is there any significance to that?
Yes, Palestine has been invited. They haven't responded as far as I know yet, positive or negatively. But regardless of how they reply, it is a major development. I'm glad someone asked that, because it means the message to the US that Palestine exists. Palestine is an economic unit. Palestine will be part of the global community. And the US is getting that message loud and clear. I think this very weak Palestinian leadership is in a bind right now, because the logic would say you join BRICS when you're allowed to, because they're never going to have you join the G7. But when you do that, you're actually slapping the US in the face. And this current Palestinian leadership is probably hesitant to do that. Not sure why at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole other topic for, because I
It's a
think
good topic to have on its own.
yeah, crisis of Palestinian leadership. So yeah. Are there any other questions that people have?
Yeah, I had one other question for Sam. Does he know the current situation in Burkina, in the northwest of the occupied territories? Um, um, anyway.
I don't have updated details. The last I heard, I mean, they're under attack basically as a community. I don't have the latest and greatest. We are being overwhelmed right now. We are literally being overwhelmed. We're not able to keep up with the amount of death and destruction. And we're doing this trying to run businesses and keeping things afloat, which is not easy. Literally every single hour, there's something happening getting our attention. So I'm sorry I don't have the details on that, but that's why. I should note in closing as well, I have a blog historically. It's called epalestine.ps. Today, about 2 hours before this call, I spent the last year updating it a little bit. So the new version was released. You can find me and all my social media contacts at epalestine.ps. Please link up, stay in touch, keep me posted. I'm here as a resource if I can be of any help in your activities. But most importantly, and Sabeel does this better than anyone else, is to organize in your local community. We have to do this in community to be able to not only address Israel, but now to address Trump as well.
I see 2 hands, so I don't know if you have time to.
Sure, I'm free.
So, Jake, you have your hand up.
Thank you. First of all, I'm calling from Toronto, Canada. And my comment or question is in regard to the Palestinian Authority, mainly Abu Mazen and his entourage, that they are cooperating with Israel fully. A few months ago, Israel banned Al Jazeera from reporting from the territories and from Israel because they're afraid of the truth. But Palestinian Authority did the same thing. They banned Al Jazeera from the West Bank and so on. This is basically treason. I mean, how come you cannot get rid of those bombs? I mean, they totally colluded with Israel.
It's very problematic today. I have written extensively about the internal affairs of the Palestinian leadership. Actually, I haven't written anything. I write frequently, but I haven't written anything since October 7th at all. Why? I believe if you didn't understand what was happening here on October 6th, you're not going to understand it on October 7th moving forward until this genocide ends. Right now, emotions have the best of everybody. However, 2 weeks before this October 7th happened, I wrote 2 pieces in September, and I felt that those kind of covered a lot of ground. One was about the internal Palestinian leadership issue. I suggested, and you'll find it on my blog, I suggested a speech that Abbas should have given at the UN in September, the same time when Netanyahu was holding up that map. If he would have read my suggested talk, I don't think October 7th would have happened. And the second piece that I wrote was about the Saudi Arabia, Israel, US kind of normalization. And at the end of that article, I actually quoted a friend of mine, a lawyer, who basically said, this can't go on. Something will happen, something dramatic will happen to change course of history. And then October 7th happened. So I felt those 2 articles kind of said what I needed to say. And now I'm all about holding the business fort so people can still have jobs and trying to help where I can Gazans, including Mahat, the person who took that picture, which you're going to find on my blog as well, and trying to support thinking of how do you bring Gaza back to life. That is a task. It's a lifetime task. We're going to try to start it.
But why you cannot get rid of Abu Mazen and his entourage? His,
As soon as Trump makes Canada part of the US, I'm going to ask you that question of why can't we get rid of Trump? These are autocratic regimes, which are not easy stones to move, but ultimately they'll be moved. I mean, civil society here is very dynamic. There's a lot of pushback on what he's doing, but it has become a police state. They have cracked down on activists trying to call for accountability. So it's no different than Trump evicting people from the US without due diligence. That's hard to overcome, and what we're having is hard to overcome. And we have to face an occupation above and beyond that as well.
Yeah, and there's a shrinking of civil society space worldwide, I think in Palestine, I think in particular.
Yes.
Laurent?
Yes, hello, Sam.
Hi.
Good to see you again. You did a webinar for us for World Beyond War and Veterans for
I
Peace.
remember.
And I'm wondering about any attempts to silence you there in Palestine. So I'm wondering if you've been talked to or whatever, threatened or whatever.
I have not been. I've been approached by people in the government after I've written critical articles, but only questioned in terms of casual, why'd you do that kind of thing. But I have not been silenced. And I can attribute that to you and to this group and to the hundreds of groups that I have spoken to over the last decades, because I believe that they understand that they are dealing with a very, very squeaky wheel.
Good. Good. Well, good to see you and thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you as well.
You're doing.
I think those are all the questions that we have today. Thank you so much, Sam, for taking the time to
Thank you.
talk to us.
Thanks everyone here. And please link up to my social media so that we can be in touch on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. My daughters taught me how to use all those. Be well, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.